Denise grew up in Marshall's mansion, a house filled with polished marble floors, high ceilings, and chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. But to her, the place rarely felt like home. From the moment Marilyn, Marshall's second wife, stepped into the house, Denise's life became one of isolation. The servants who once smiled at her suddenly began to treat her like a stranger. They whispered in corners. Their loyalties shifted toward Marilyn, who ruled the house with a stern voice and a calculating smile. Denise, only 8 when her father remarried, felt the chill of rejection every day. When she tried to join in laughter around the sitting room, conversations would halt. When she approached the dining table, her place setting was sometimes forgotten. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. She was no longer welcome in the home her late mother had once filled with warmth. On lonely evenings, Denise would sit by her bedroom window, staring at the gardens where she once played freely. Now, the garden gates seemed to close themselves whenever Marilyn's children, Marion and Philip, played outside. "Don't touch that swing, Denise," a maid once told her coldly. "It's not yours anymore." She ran back to her room, tears stinging her eyes. The only comfort she found was in her father's brief visits. Marshall would knock softly and sit by her bed, stroking her hair as she cried. "Don't let them silence you, my dear," he whispered once. "This is your home as much as theirs." Yet, even in his presence, Denise could see his weariness. He loved her, but he seemed powerless to challenge Marilyn's growing influence in the household. And so, Denise learned early how to live in silence, carrying her loneliness like a hidden scar. Marilyn never raised a hand against Denise, but her tongue was sharper than any blade. Whenever Marshall was away at business meetings, Marilyn would corner Denise in the hallway, her perfume heavy and her smile poisoned. "You are nothing but a mistake," she would whisper, her words sinking into Denise's heart like venom. "Your mother trapped Marshall, and now you're the stain left behind." Denise would lower her eyes, clutching her hands tightly to stop them from trembling. The cruelty never stopped there. Marion and Philip, young but quick to mirror their mother, would echo her insults. "You're not one of us," Marion sneered one afternoon when Denise tried to join their game. Philip laughed and added, "Even Mama says you're just a mistake." Denise turned away before they could see her tears, running to the back of the house where no one followed. That night, she found herself curled on her bed, whispering to the empty air, "Why am I here if no one wants me?" When Marshall entered her room later, she almost told him, but the fear of being brushed aside kept her quiet. Instead, she forced a smile. "How was your day, Papa?" she asked softly. Marshall looked at her for a long time, as though he could sense her pain. He touched her cheek and said, "No matter what you hear, you are my blood, Denise. Don't ever forget that." His words were a fragile shield, but they gave her enough strength to endure another day. Still, when the night stretched on and Marilyn's whispers echoed in her mind, Denise felt her heart breaking piece by piece. She was just a child, but she already understood the crushing weight of being unwanted in her own father's house. The day Marshall called Denise into his study felt like a secret sanctuary. The study smelled of leather and old books, lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Denise rarely entered. Marilyn always forbade her, claiming it was for the real family. Yet Marshall's voice carried warmth as he beckoned her inside. "Sit with me, my dear," he said, patting the armchair across from him. Denise sat nervously, her small hands folded in her lap. Marshall's once strong frame now seemed thinner, his coughs frequent, his eyes tired. He reached across the desk and held her hand tightly. "Denise, promise me something," he said, his voice low but firm. "No matter what happens, no matter what they say, remember this, you are mine. My daughter, my pride." Denise blinked back tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "But Mama Marilyn says I'm not wanted here." Marshall's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the man of authority returned. "Do not listen to her. This house is yours. You belong here. Always." Denise clung to those words as if they were lifelines. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile, pressing her forehead against her father's hand. "I'll remember, Papa, I promise." Marshall smiled faintly, though his cough interrupted him again, his body shaking with weakness. Denise rushed to fetch him water, her small hands trembling as she offered the glass. Watching him sip slowly, she realized her father's strength was fading, and it frightened her. Yet his words glowed inside her like a candle in darkness. She carried them with her as she returned to her room, whispering them over and over. "You are mine, my daughter, my pride." Even as Marilyn's disdain grew sharper by the day, Denise's father's promise became the quiet armor that kept her from shattering. Dinners in the mansion became rituals of exclusion. The long mahogany table stretched endlessly, yet Denise always felt there was no room for her. Marilyn sat at the head when Marshall was unwell, flanked by Marion and Philip, who filled the air with laughter and chatter. Denise sat quietly at the far end, her plate half empty, her presence ignored. Whenever she tried to speak, Marion would roll her eyes. "Nobody asked you," she said once, causing Philip to burst into laughter. Marilyn smiled indulgently at her children, as if mocking Denise was a game they played well. Marshall, when present, would glance at Denise with a mix of guilt and frustration. He would clear his throat and attempt to involve her. "Denise, how was your day?" he asked one evening. But before she could reply, Marilyn cut in smoothly. "She does nothing worth mentioning. Better to talk about Philip's school honors." The conversation shifted, and Denise's voice disappeared again. Later that night, Denise sat in her room staring at her untouched dinner. She thought of her late mother, whose picture she kept hidden inside her pillowcase because Marilyn had ordered every trace of her removed from the house. "Do you see me, Mama?" she whispered into the silence. "I don't think anyone else does." In the dim glow of her bedside lamp, Denise felt both invisible and painfully present. She knew she was her father's daughter, but she was treated as if she were a guest, overstaying her welcome. Every dinner table snub, every cruel glance, every silenced word chipped away at her, yet she carried them quietly. She had no one to confide in, except her memories of her mother's gentle embrace and her father's fading promises. When Marshall's health began to fail, it was Denise who stayed by his side. She fetched water when his coughs worsened, read aloud from his favorite novels, and prayed silently for his strength to return. At night, when his breathing grew ragged, Denise would sit by his bed, holding his hand and whispering, "I'm here, Papa. I won't leave you." In those moments, Marshall would open his weary eyes, a faint smile crossing his face. "You have your mother's heart," he told her once, voice hoarse. "Always giving, even when you receive nothing." Denise's eyes filled with tears, but she remained steady. She cooked simple meals for him when the servants delayed, washed his face with warm cloths, and listened to his stories when he wanted to remember younger, stronger days. Meanwhile, Marilyn busied herself with estate meetings, calling lawyers and accountants, always insisting it was for Marshall's sake. But her eyes gleamed too brightly when discussing properties and businesses. She rarely visited his bedside, except when others were present, putting on a show of being a caring wife. Denise saw through it, but she said nothing. She didn't need recognition. Her only desire was to make her father comfortable. Even when Marion mocked her, calling her the nursemaid, Denise kept her focus on Marshall. Loyalty anchored her, giving her strength even as exhaustion weighed her down. She never imagined those final months would be the most precious memories she carried, proof of a love that remained unbroken even in a house that tried to erase her. The night the mansion fell into silence was the night Denise's world collapsed. She had been sitting in the hallway outside her father's room, her head resting against the wall, when she heard the sudden stillness in his breathing. For hours she had been reading softly to him, her voice quivering but steady, clinging to the hope that if she just kept talking, he would keep listening. But when the words trailed off, she heard nothing but emptiness. Heart pounding, she rushed inside to see Marshall's face pale, his chest unmoving, his eyes half closed as though frozen between one world and the next. "Papa, please wake up," Denise whispered, shaking him gently. But there was no response. She screamed for help, her cry echoing through the mansion. The servants came running, and within minutes the house that once ignored her was filled with hurried footsteps and hushed whispers. Marilyn arrived in her satin robe, her face unreadable as she glanced at Marshall's lifeless form. "It was bound to happen," she said coldly, brushing past Denise, who knelt weeping beside the bed. To Denise, the grief was unbearable. This was not just death. It was the tearing away of her only shield in a world that had never accepted her. The hours that followed blurred into shadows. Denise remained on the floor, clutching her father's hand long after it had grown cold. Every memory, his voice, his promises, his laughter, flooded her until she could hardly breathe. "You said I belonged here, Papa. You said I was yours," she cried, her tears soaking the blanket. Marilyn ordered the servants to prepare the house for mourners, already speaking about funeral arrangements with a tone that lacked even a trace of sorrow. "Call the caterers. We must send word to the dignitaries. This will be a grand farewell," she declared, as though she were planning a banquet rather than burying her husband. Denise looked up, her voice breaking. "Please, let me help. He was my father, too." Marilyn's gaze hardened. "Do not speak out of turn, girl. Stay where you belong." In that moment, Denise realized that with her father gone, the cruelty she had endured would only deepen. Alone in the room that once held his warmth, she clung to his memory, vowing silently that no matter what Marilyn did, she would not let her father's love be erased. The days before the funeral revealed the full extent of Marilyn's power. She moved through the mansion like a queen preparing for a coronation, issuing orders with sharp precision, her voice echoing through the halls. The sitting room was filled with tailors and florists, her chosen people arranging fabrics and flowers to her exact taste. Marian and Philip were fitted into black garments lined with silver embroidery, looking more like they were preparing for a parade than mourning their father. Denise watched from the corner, her own dress plain and modest, a hand-me-down she had stitched herself. When she approached Marilyn timidly, holding a folded piece of cloth, she said softly, "Please, Mama Marilyn, I want to be part of the ceremony. I need to say goodbye." Marilyn turned, her eyes narrowing. "You dare," she hissed, the room suddenly quiet. "I will not let a bastard stain this ceremony. You will stay far away from the church. Do you hear me?" Denise's lips trembled. "He was my father. He loved me." But Marilyn raised her hand sharply. "Enough. Not another word. You are nothing here, Denise. Nothing." The word struck harder than any slap, leaving Denise breathless. That night, Denise sat on her bed, staring at the black dress she had laid out. It was simple, almost too plain, but to her it held meaning. She had sewn it weeks ago when her father's condition worsened, as though she had known she would need it. She whispered to the empty room, "I will wear this for you, Papa. Even if she won't let me inside, I will stand at the door." The mansion bustled with preparation, but Denise was treated like an invisible shadow. When the hearse arrived to take Marshall's body away, she reached for it, her hand brushing the polished wood. Marilyn shoved her aside. "Step back, girl. This is not your place." Denise stood frozen as the car rolled away, her heart aching with every turn of the wheels. She knew then that she would have to fight even to grieve. The morning of the funeral was drenched in gray clouds, as if the heavens themselves mourned with Denise. She arrived at the church early, her plain black dress clinging to her frame in the damp air, her face pale from sleepless nights. The grand gates were adorned with ribbons and wreaths, and dignitaries filed in, dressed in elegant mourning clothes. Denise clutched her Bible close, her steps small but steady as she walked toward the entrance. Just as she reached for the doors, 2 guards stepped forward, blocking her path. "Orders from Madame Marilyn," one said flatly. Denise's voice broke. "Please, let me in. He was my father. Just let me sit in the back." The guards shook their heads. "We can't allow that." Her hands trembled as she tried again, her eyes pleading. "Just one moment, please." But a sharp voice cut through the crowd. Marilyn appeared, her black veil flowing, her lips twisted in disdain. "Did I not warn you? A bastard child has no right to mourn here. Leave before you shame his name." The onlookers shifted uneasily, some whispering in pity, others pretending not to see. Denise's throat tightened as she stepped back, her heart shattering with every word. "Papa, forgive me," she whispered under her breath, her tears spilling freely. She turned away, but her body refused to move. She could hear the hymns starting inside, the choir's voices rising in sorrowful beauty. Every note felt like a knife, reminding her that she was locked outside, unworthy in the eyes of those who held power. She sank to her knees, the wet ground soaking her dress, her Bible falling beside her. God, why won't they let me in? He was mine too, she sobbed. Her cries blended with the rain that began to fall, soft at first and then heavy, as though the sky wept with her. The downpour turned the churchyard into a blur of umbrellas and hurrying footsteps. Denise remained kneeling on the wet ground, her hair plastered to her face, her body trembling. Her cries were muffled by the rain, yet those passing by could hear her broken whispers. Papa, I only wanted to say goodbye. Some mourners glanced at her with pity, but no one dared to intervene. Marilyn's authority was too strong, her reputation too fierce. Inside the church, the organ swelled, and Denise pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block the sound that reminded her of all she had lost. Every hymn sung inside felt like another door slammed against her heart. She raised her face to the sky, the raindrops mingling with her tears, and shouted softly into the storm, "You said I belonged, Papa. Why won't they let me in?" The wind carried her words away, leaving her alone in her grief. As the service ended, she watched through blurred eyes as the mourners emerged, their umbrellas shielding them from the storm. Marilyn walked proudly at the front, Marian and Philip at her side, their expressions smug. They did not even glance toward Denise, as though she were invisible. The casket was carried past her, and Denise stretched out her trembling hand, longing to touch it, to feel one last connection to the man she loved. But a guard shoved her aside roughly, and the procession moved on. Denise collapsed again, her sobs drowned by the storm. By the time the hearse drove away, her body was numb, her voice hoarse from crying. She was left kneeling in the mud, drenched and broken, denied even the smallest dignity of mourning her father. That image would sear itself into her memory forever, the day she wept in the rain while her family erased her from her father's farewell. When Denise returned to the mansion, the air felt colder, emptier, as though the house itself had been stripped of its soul. She dragged her soaked body through the gates, her dress heavy with rain, her Bible clutched tightly against her chest. Inside, the rooms were alive with chatter and laughter as guests gathered for the post-funeral reception. Servants carried trays of wine and food, their faces bright as they served Marilyn's chosen guests. Denise tried to slip quietly to her room, but she stopped when she heard Marilyn's voice ringing out from the grand hall. "Welcome to the new beginning of this estate. From today, my children Marian and Philip are the heirs to everything Marshall left behind." Applause filled the hall as Marilyn raised a glass. Denise froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. She felt invisible, like a ghost haunting a home that no longer recognized her. Later, when the guests had left, Denise crept to her small room at the far end of the house. It was the only space Marilyn had allowed her, and even there the servants often ignored her requests. She sat on her narrow bed, her wet dress clinging uncomfortably, and stared at the cracked ceiling. Through the walls, she could hear Marian laughing as he boasted about his new role as heir, and Philip giggling as Marilyn promised him everything he desired. Denise covered her ears, whispering to herself, "This is not the end. He loved me. He promised me I belonged here." But the reality was crushing. Marshall was gone, and with him, any protection she once had. Alone in her room, she broke down, her sobs muffled by her pillow. That night marked the beginning of her new life as a shadow in the very estate where she was born, and the pain of being erased by those who should have been her family carved deeper into her soul. The days after the funeral stretched into weeks, and the mansion became a place Denise hardly recognized. With her father gone, the servants no longer looked at her with even the faintest courtesy. They passed her in the hallways as though she were invisible. When she spoke, her words floated unheard into the air. Breakfasts were taken without her, the long dining table now claimed by Marilyn, Marian, and Philip, who laughed and chatted loudly, their voices echoing against the high ceilings. Denise wandered alone through the gardens, where the flowers her father had once admired now seemed lifeless to her eyes. She traced her fingers along the hedges, whispering, "You always said this place was mine, too. Why does it feel like I'm trespassing?" No answer came, only the distant sound of Marian shouting orders at servants, as if the estate already belonged to him. At night, Denise would retreat into her small room, the silence weighing heavier than the walls around her. She wrote letters addressed to her father, pages filled with thoughts she could no longer say aloud. Dear Papa, I miss you. Marilyn says I don't belong here, but I still feel you near me. Am I foolish to think you can hear me? She folded the letters and hid them under her pillow, her only means of keeping him close. One evening, when she tried to enter the library, a servant stopped her abruptly. Madame Marilyn says you're not allowed in there anymore, the maid muttered. Denise swallowed her hurt, nodding, and walked away, her heart burning with quiet defiance. Every corner of the mansion reminded her of loss, yet she refused to let herself disappear. Beneath the silence, a determination began to stir, though she had no idea where it would lead. Marilyn wasted no time reshaping the estate to reflect her vision of power and permanence. The portraits of Marshall and Denise's late mother, once displayed proudly in the main hall, were taken down and stored away in the attic. In their place, paintings of Marilyn draped in silk and her children in elaborate poses filled the walls. Denise stood one afternoon, watching as workers carried her mother's portrait away. Please, don't take that, she pleaded, stepping forward. But Marilyn appeared in the doorway, her voice cold. That woman has no place here anymore, and neither do her memories. Learn your place, Denise. Denise bit her lip to keep from crying as she watched the portrait disappear up the stairs, knowing her mother's presence was being erased from the house just as she was. The furniture was replaced with gleaming pieces Marilyn handpicked, the gardens trimmed into harsh symmetry, and even the family crest was altered to feature Marilyn's initials intertwined with Marshall's. It felt to Denise like a slow erasure of everything her father had stood for. One evening, she overheard Marion boasting in the parlor. Mother says this whole place is ours now. I'll inherit the business, and Philip will inherit the land. Philip chuckled, adding, and Denise, she'll inherit nothing but shadows. Their laughter echoed through the halls, stabbing her like knives. Denise pressed her back against the wall, her fists clenched. They think they've erased me, she whispered to herself. But I am not gone. I won't let them bury me alive in this house. It was the first time her voice carried defiance, even if no one else could hear it. One afternoon, Denise sat alone near the garage, her knees pulled to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had tried to endure, to keep her father's words alive inside her, but the weight of being invisible was suffocating. Ernest, the family's long-serving driver, noticed her and approached slowly, his weathered face etched with concern. Miss Denise, he said gently, you shouldn't cry where the others can see. They don't deserve to know your pain. Denise quickly wiped her face, forcing a smile. I'm fine, Ernest. I'm just tired. But Ernest shook his head. Your father would never want you to hide your sorrow. He trusted you more than anyone, even if others pretend you don't exist. Denise looked up at him, startled. He trusted me. How can you be so sure? Ernest hesitated, his eyes softening. Because he told me so with his own lips before he left us. Denise's heart raced at his words. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. What did he say, Ernest? Please tell me. Ernest sighed heavily, as if carrying a burden too long. He knew what kind of woman Madame Marilyn was, and he feared what she would do after he was gone. He made me promise to protect you, even if I could do nothing else. Denise's tears welled again, but this time they were mixed with hope. Protect me how? I have nothing left. They've taken everything. Ernest glanced around to be sure no one was near, then lowered his voice. Not everything, child. There are truths hidden here, truths that will one day restore what is yours. When the time is right, I will show you. Denise felt her breath catch in her throat. For the first time since her father's death, the weight of despair lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile spark of something new possibility. The following week, Ernest called Denise to the driver's quarters, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with an old wooden box. Denise entered hesitantly, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Why did you ask me to come here, Ernest? She whispered. Ernest sat down heavily, his face lined with years of loyalty and secrecy. Because it is time, he said. He opened the box and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges but carefully preserved. He placed it gently in Denise's hands. Your father gave me this on the night he fell gravely ill. He told me to guard it until you were ready to face the truth. Denise's hands shook as she looked at the envelope, her name written in Marshall's shaky handwriting. She pressed it to her chest, her heart pounding. "Why didn't you give this to me before?" she asked, her voice cracking. Ernest looked down, his eyes clouded with guilt. "I was afraid, child, afraid of what Marilyn might do if she found out. But I promised him, and I cannot break that promise any longer." Denise sat down, staring at the envelope as if it were both salvation and curse. Her tears blurred the letters of her name, and she whispered, "Papa, what did you leave for me?" Ernest leaned forward, his voice firm. "Do not open it here. Take it to your room. Read it when you are alone. And whatever you find, guard it with your life." Denise clutched the envelope tightly, fear mingling with hope. What if it's nothing? What if it only proves what Marilyn says, that I'm nothing? Ernest placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "No, Denise. I believe it will prove the opposite. Your father loved you too much to leave you empty-handed." For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him. As she left the driver's quarters, the envelope hidden under her shawl, she felt the air of the estate shift around her, as though her father's presence stirred once more within its walls. That night, Denise locked herself in her room, her hands trembling as she laid the envelope on her desk. The house was silent, Marilyn and her children asleep, the servants long gone to their quarters. She lit a candle, the flickering light casting shadows across the walls, and slowly broke the seal. Inside was a folded document, and as she opened it, her father's handwriting stared back at her, familiar, shaky, but undeniably his. Her heart thudded as she read the first lines. "This is my last will and testament. I, Marshall Ellington, leave the entirety of my estate, including the mansion, lands, and businesses, to my daughter, Denise Ellington." Tears flooded her eyes, dripping onto the parchment. She covered her mouth to muffle her sobs, whispering, "Papa, you thought of me. You never forgot me." The words blurred as she continued reading, her father's love etched into every line. He wrote of his fears about Marilyn's greed, his knowledge that Denise was the only one who had stayed by his side, and his determination that she should inherit everything he built. Denise fell to her knees, clutching the will to her chest, her body shaking with relief and anguish. "They tried to erase me," she cried softly, "but you didn't let them. You protected me even after death." She crawled onto her bed, holding the document as though it were her father's arms. For the first time since the funeral, the ache in her heart eased, replaced by a burning determination. "I will not let them bury your words, Papa. They will know the truth." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but Denise did not feel afraid. She had her father's voice again, and it gave her courage to face whatever storm lay ahead. Denise woke the next morning with the will still clutched in her hands, her heart torn between relief and dread. She read it again, tracing her father's signature as though to reassure herself it was real. The realization dawned on her slowly, chilling her blood, if this was his true testament, then Marilyn had knowingly hidden it. The grand speeches at the reception, the smug proclamations that Marion and Philip were heirs, the lawyer's silence, none of it was ignorance. It was conspiracy. Denise's breath grew shallow as she whispered. She knew, and she lied. She remembered the sharp glances exchanged between Marilyn and the family lawyer on the day of the funeral. At the time, she thought nothing of it, but now it painted the truth with sinister clarity. Her father had trusted his lawyer, but money and greed had twisted loyalty into betrayal. Denise gripped the will tighter, her knuckles white, anger rising inside her. "They stole everything from me. They wanted to bury me with him." That afternoon, she confronted Ernest in the garage, showing him the will. His eyes softened, though his jaw tightened. "I feared this child. I feared she bribed him to silence your father's words." Denise swallowed hard, her voice trembling but resolute. "What do I do, Ernest? She has the wealth, the servants, the influence. I have nothing but this paper." Ernest leaned closer, his voice steady. "It is more than paper. It is truth. And truth is stronger than all her lies." Denise nodded, but fear crept into her chest. "She'll destroy me if she finds out I have this." Ernest placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Then you must protect it with your life. When the time comes, use it wisely. Your father entrusted you with his legacy, not her." For the first time in weeks, Denise allowed her anger to harden into resolve. She whispered under her breath, "I will not let her bury me again." Denise kept the will hidden beneath her mattress, her heart leaping every time footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her room. At night she would whisper to herself, "Stay strong, Papa is with me," and trace her fingers over his words to steady her fear. Days stretched into nights filled with restless pacing, the weight of her secret pressing down heavily. Yet, amidst the fear, a strange fire began to grow inside her. Each time Marilyn passed by with her cold, commanding tone, Denise found herself standing taller, no longer lowering her eyes as quickly. When Philip mocked her one evening, tossing a glass of water deliberately near her skirt, she looked him in the eye for the first time and said firmly, "You may laugh now, but one day you'll regret it." He froze, startled by her sudden boldness, before scoffing and walking away. Still, it was the first time Denise had dared to speak back, and she carried that small victory like a jewel in her heart. She met Ernest in the garden the next morning, and he noticed her steadier voice. "You sound different, Denise," he remarked, trimming the hedges. She nodded slowly. "Because for the first time, I believe I have something worth fighting for. I have proof that my father saw me, that I was never what Marilyn called me." Ernest placed down his shears, his expression soft. "Then you must not hide in the shadows anymore. When the time comes, you will need more than courage. You will need help." Denise looked at him carefully. Help from who? Everyone sides with her. Ernest paused before answering. "Not everyone. There are still people who value truth, who live by honor. I will find someone who can stand with you." Denise felt her chest tighten, a strange mixture of hope and fear. For the first time since Marshall's death, she wasn't simply surviving, she was preparing. True to his word, Ernest arranged a meeting for Denise with Francis, a young lawyer whose reputation was whispered in the town as sharp, fearless, and incorruptible. They met in a small cafe far from the mansion, Denise sitting nervously in the corner as Francis arrived with a stack of files under his arm. His eyes were steady, his tone brisk but kind. "Ernest told me you needed help," he said, leaning forward. Denise's voice trembled as she slid the will across the table. "This is my father's true testament. They hid it. They gave everything to Marilyn and her children." Francis adjusted his glasses, reading carefully, his expression tightening with every line. Finally, he looked up. "This is authentic. I can see the seals, the phrasing, the signature. It holds weight. If this is verified in court, you are the rightful heir." Denise's eyes filled with tears. "Then I can take back what's mine." Francis nodded. "Yes, but prepare yourself. They will fight with every weapon they have. They will slander you, call you names, and twist stories. Are you ready for that storm?" Denise's fingers trembled around her teacup, but her voice held steady. "I've been living in a storm since the day she stepped into our home. I won't break again." Francis studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then we file. But you must guard this will as though your life depends on it, because in many ways it does." Ernest reached across the table, patting her hand. "You are not alone in this, Denise. Your father's blood runs strong in you. Don't forget that." Denise inhaled deeply, clutching the will to her chest once more. For the first time, she felt she wasn't fighting in darkness. There was light ahead, a chance to reclaim the legacy that was stolen. Her heart whispered fiercely, "Papa, I will not fail you." The day Francis filed the case on Denise's behalf, whispers spread like wildfire. The town buzzed with shock, and many shook their heads in disbelief. "The girl dares to challenge Marilyn," one merchant muttered. "She'll be crushed." But others murmured in hushed awe, "She's braver than I thought. Perhaps there is truth to her claim." Denise, though frightened, walked beside Ernest to the courthouse, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. Inside, Francis stood tall, declaring their claim before the clerk. "We contest the validity of the will presented by Marilyn Ellington. We have in our possession the authentic last testament of Marshall Ellington, naming Denise Ellington as his sole heir." Denise's chest swelled with equal parts pride and terror. The clerk's eyes widened, knowing the storm it would unleash. Within hours, word reached Marilyn, who erupted in fury. That evening, Marilyn stormed into Denise's room, her heels striking the floor like hammers. She slammed the door behind her, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful wretch," she hissed. "How dare you drag this family into the mud? You think anyone will believe you over me? Over my children?" Denise stood, trembling but refusing to step back. "It's not about belief. It's about truth. And the truth is my father wanted me to have everything." Marilyn's lips curled into a venomous smile. "Foolish girl. Do you think a piece of paper can defeat me? I own this house, this town, even the law bends to me. You will regret this." Denise's voice cracked, but she met Marilyn's gaze. "Maybe, but I'd rather fight and lose than let you erase him." For the first time, Marilyn faltered, her eyes narrowing before she turned and stormed out. Alone in the silence, Denise's heart pounded wildly, but she whispered to herself, "I will not be afraid of her anymore." The first day in court arrived, and Denise felt her stomach twist as she entered the towering building. She clutched the will inside her bag, her knuckles pale, her steps unsteady. Ernest walked beside her, whispering, "Courage, child. This is where your father's voice will finally be heard." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. Marilyn entered moments later, draped in black lace, her presence commanding, her head held high. Marion followed with arrogance in his stride, Philip smirking as if the trial was already a game he had won. They sat with their lawyer, a man whose smug smile told Denise he had been well paid to protect their lies. Denise avoided their gaze, focusing instead on Francis, who whispered, "Stay calm. Let me do the talking. The truth is on our side." As the judge called the case, Marilyn leaned across the aisle, her voice low and poisonous. "You should have stayed in your corner, Denise. Now I'll destroy you in front of everyone." Denise stiffened, her lips tightening, but she didn't reply. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, remembering Marshall's words in the study. "You are mine, my daughter, my pride." When she opened them, her fear had shifted into something firmer, determination. As the lawyers presented their opening arguments, the courtroom was divided between those who believed Marilyn's wealth would crush Denise and those who admired the young woman's courage. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time, Denise no longer felt like a shadow. She was standing in the open, ready to fight for her name. The courtroom brimmed with tension as Marilyn's lawyer rose confidently, presenting the fraudulent will with the flourish of a man certain of his victory. He held it high, his voice booming. "Your Honor, this document clearly names Madame Marilyn Ellington and her children as the rightful heirs to the estate of the late Marshall Ellington." It was signed, sealed, and witnessed. Murmurs spread among the onlookers, many nodding as though the argument had already closed the matter. Denise sat rigidly, her fingers clutching the edge of her chair, her breath shallow. She wanted to shout that it was a lie, that her father would never have abandoned her. But Francis touched her arm gently. "Patience," he whispered. "Let them speak. Truth doesn't need haste, it needs proof." Across the aisle, Marilyn sat composed, her chin lifted, her lips curved in a faint smirk. Marion leaned back, arms folded arrogantly, while Philip tapped his fingers on the desk as if already bored by what he believed to be a predictable win. When Francis rose, the tone in the room shifted. He didn't rush, but walked calmly to the center, unfolding the authentic will in his hands. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but commanding, "there is another document, one that carries not just a seal, but the undeniable truth of a dying man's final words." He held up the aged parchment, its edges yellow, but its writing bold. The spectators leaned forward, whispers rippling through the room. Marilyn's face twitched, a small crack in her mask of composure. "This," Francis continued, "is Marshall Ellington's true testament, naming his only daughter, Denise Ellington, as the sole heir." He placed it on the judge's bench, his eyes flashing with certainty. Denise's heart pounded in her chest as the judge leaned forward to examine the document. And for the first time, the weight of possibility pressed down on Marilyn. During a recess, Denise stepped out into the corridor, her legs trembling from the weight of the moment. The walls seemed to close in around her as she tried to gather her breath. Suddenly, Marilyn's heels clicked against the marble floor, her presence heavy as she approached. Her veil lifted slightly, revealing eyes like sharpened steel. "You foolish child," she hissed, her words dripping with venom. "Do you truly believe that parchment will save you?" You've always been nothing, and in the end, you'll return to nothing. Marion stepped forward, towering over Denise with a mocking grin. Enjoy this little show while it lasts, he sneered. Because once this is over, we'll make sure you're begging in the streets. Philip laughed lightly, adding, Maybe we'll let you sweep the halls of the estate if you're lucky. Denise's chest tightened, but instead of retreating, she lifted her chin and met their gazes. Her voice, though soft, cut with clarity. I'd rather beg in the streets than live in a mansion built on lies. At least my father's love was real, something none of you can ever claim. For the first time, their mocking expressions faltered. Marilyn narrowed her eyes, whispering, You'll regret crossing me, girl. I'll see you crawl. But Denise did not flinch. I've already crawled, she said firmly. Now I will rise. Francis reappeared, stepping between them. Enough of this intimidation, he said sharply. Save your arrogance for the courtroom. Denise followed him back inside, her knees still trembling, but her spirit refusing to break. The courtroom resumed, and Francis called his first witness, Ernest, the loyal driver. He walked with slow, deliberate steps, his aged hands folded before him. The spectators murmured, some recognizing him as the man who had served the family for decades. Taking the stand, Ernest raised his hand and swore to speak the truth. Francis approached gently. Ernest, can you tell the court what Marshall entrusted to you before his death? Ernest's voice, though worn with age, carried strength. On the night he grew gravely ill, Marshall Ellington called me to his study. He told me his fears, that his wife would try to take everything and leave his daughter with nothing. He placed a sealed envelope in my hands and said, Ernest, guard this for Denise. She is the one who has stood by me. She is the heir to all I have. Gasps filled the courtroom, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Marilyn's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay, Your Honor. Nothing but sentimental nonsense from an old servant. But before the judge could reply, Ernest continued, his voice rising with conviction. I swore on my life to protect what he gave me, and I did. That envelope contained the true will, signed and sealed by Marshall himself. I delivered it to Denise when the time was right, as he commanded. The crowd erupted in whispers, and the judge motioned for silence. Francis walked closer. Ernest, did you witness anything else that would explain why the other will surfaced instead? Ernest's jaw tightened. Yes, I overheard Madame Marilyn late at night speaking with the lawyer. She said, make sure the girl never touches a coin of his fortune. Write it as if it all belongs to me and my children. I'll make it worth your while. The courtroom gasped again, eyes turning to Marilyn, whose composure was beginning to crack. The tension thickened as Francis approached the bench with the sealed envelope Ernest had protected. He held it carefully, presenting it to the judge. Your Honor, this is the envelope in question, bearing the handwriting of Marshall Ellington, addressed directly to his daughter, Denise. Inside is the testament already submitted into evidence. I request that the envelope and its contents be examined for authenticity. The judge leaned forward, his face grave as he signaled for the bailiff to retrieve the item. The envelope was opened in the presence of all, its seal broken only by the judge himself. Murmurs echoed through the chamber as the handwriting was compared against known letters of Marshall's. The resemblance was undeniable, the strokes distinct, the ink faded but genuine. Denise held her breath, her eyes fixed on the document as though it were her father speaking once more. Across the room, Marilyn shifted uncomfortably, her fingers gripping the arm of her chair until her knuckles whitened. Philip whispered, Mother, do something. But she silenced him with a sharp gesture. Francis stepped forward again, his voice carrying the calm of a man who knew victory was near. The truth has a way of speaking for itself. This is not fabrication. This is the last voice of a man who loved his daughter enough to shield her from deceit. Marilyn's lawyer tried to interject, stammering about forged papers and fabricated evidence, but the judge raised his hand. Enough. We will have independent verification. The court will not be swayed by speculation. For the first time, Denise saw fear flicker openly in Marilyn's eyes. Her mask of confidence had cracked, and the courtroom could sense it. Days later, experts arrived with their findings, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. The lead examiner took the stand, laying out documents and notes. We have thoroughly examined the handwriting, ink, and paper of the contested will and the envelope provided. After forensic analysis, there is no doubt the will presented by Denise Ellington is authentic. It bears the original seal of Marshall Ellington and matches his verified handwriting samples. Conversely, the will produced by Madame Marilyn contains inconsistencies in ink composition and signatures that appear traced. The words rang out like thunder, silencing the crowd. Denise's heart pounded, tears brimming in her eyes as she gripped Ernest's hand tightly. Marilyn's face paled, her lips parting but no words emerging. Marion slammed his fist against the bench in disbelief, while Philip sat frozen, his smirk erased. Francis stood, his voice calm but cutting. Your Honor, the evidence is irrefutable. The fraudulent will was crafted to strip a daughter of her rightful inheritance. The truth has spoken through ink, seal, and testimony. I request immediate recognition of Denise Ellington as the sole heir of Marshall Ellington's estate. The judge nodded gravely, addressing the court. The findings of the experts leave no room for doubt. The fraudulent will is hereby invalid. The true testament of Marshall Ellington will be honored. Denise gasped softly, her hands trembling as she whispered, Papa, we did it. The courtroom erupted in a mix of shock and applause, and for the first time, Marilyn lowered her eyes in defeat. The battle was not yet finished, but the tide had irrevocably turned. The final day of the trial drew a crowd so large the courtroom could hardly contain them. People stood pressed against the walls, craning their necks to witness the conclusion of a battle that had gripped the entire town. The judge's gavel struck, echoing through the air, and silence fell instantly. Marilyn sat rigid, her veil drawn low to hide her face, though her trembling hands betrayed her composure. Marion and Philip exchanged anxious glances, their arrogance now replaced by dread. Denise sat quietly, her heart pounding like a drum, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she whispered to herself, Papa, let this day speak for you. The judge adjusted his glasses, his tone solemn yet firm. After reviewing the testimony of witnesses, the forensic evidence, and the documents presented, this court declares the fraudulent will null and void. The valid and rightful testament of Marshall Ellington names Denise Ellington as the sole heir to the entire estate, including the mansion, businesses, and lands. His words fell like a hammer, final and unshakable. Gasps rippled through the chamber, and then came murmurs, some of astonishment, others of quiet approval, as if justice itself had taken a breath at last. Marilyn slumped against her seat, her lips parting in silent disbelief. Marion stood abruptly, his voice breaking as he cried, This cannot be! Father would never give everything to her. The judge's gavel struck sharply again. Order in this court. Sit down, young man, or I will have you removed. Philip sat frozen, staring at Denise as though seeing her for the first time, the reality of their defeat weighing on him. Denise herself could not hold back the tears that streamed down her cheeks. She rose slowly, clutching the will against her chest, and whispered into the stillness. You never abandoned me, Papa. You gave me back my name. Francis placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. It's done, Denise. You have won, not just for yourself, but for the truth. As the courtroom emptied, many turned to look at her, no longer with pity, but with admiration. The girl once ridiculed and cast aside had risen in the light of justice, carrying her father's voice into victory. When Denise stepped through the gates of the estate days later, the atmosphere was transformed. The mansion that once seemed to push her into shadows now opened its doors wide, as though recognizing its true mistress at last. The servants, once indifferent, stood in a line at the entrance, bowing their heads respectfully. Denise walked past them, her head high, her black gown flowing behind her, the same hallways that had echoed with mockery, now echoing with reverence. She entered the study where she had last sat with her father, and for the first time she crossed the threshold not as a trespasser, but as its rightful owner. The shelves of books, the heavy oak desk, the faint smell of leather and dust, all of it felt alive again. Denise ran her hand over the polished desk, her tears falling freely. I am here, Papa, she whispered softly. I kept your promise. They cannot erase me now. That evening, she walked through the halls, noticing how the portraits of Marilyn and her children still hung on the walls. She summoned the servants. "Take these down," she commanded quietly, her voice calm but unwavering. "Restore my father's images. Bring back my mother's portrait from the attic. This house will no longer hide its true history." The servants obeyed immediately, and for the first time, Denise felt the balance shift fully in her favor. She lingered in the dining hall, where she had once sat in silence at the far end of the table, overlooked and ignored. Now she stood at the head, her hands gripping the carved chair that had belonged to her father. She lowered herself into it slowly, tears filling her eyes. "I was invisible here once," she murmured to the empty hall, "but now every corner knows my name." In that moment, Denise understood that she was not simply reclaiming her father's estate, she was reclaiming herself. Late one night, as the estate lay in hushed silence, Denise heard a soft knock at the study door. When she opened it, she found Marilyn standing there, her veil removed, her face pale and lined with desperation. Gone was the arrogant posture, the cutting smile, the voice that once dripped venom. Instead, Marilyn's shoulders slumped as she whispered, "Please, Denise, may I come in?" Denise stepped aside slowly, her heart torn between anger and pity. Marilyn entered, her eyes darting around the study she once claimed as her own. "This house, these walls, they no longer belong to me," she said softly, almost to herself. She turned toward Denise, her lips trembling. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I shut you out, I humiliated you, I tried to erase you. But I beg you now, don't throw me and my children into the streets. They are all I have left." Denise listened in silence, her chest tightening. The memory of being shoved out of the church doors returned to her, the sting of Marilyn's voice declaring her unworthy. Her voice wavered as she finally spoke. "Do you remember what you said to me that day? A bastard child has no right to mourn here." Those words carved themselves into me. And now you stand here, asking for mercy? Marilyn lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was blinded by greed, Denise. I thought power was everything. But tonight I stand before you with nothing, begging the daughter I scorned to spare me." Denise closed her eyes, fighting the storm inside her. At last she opened them, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I will not repay cruelty with cruelty. You may stay, but not as mistress of this house. You will live here under my rules, not yours." Marilyn gasped, both relieved and broken. "Thank you," she whispered, sinking into the chair with a sob. The following morning, the estate awoke to a new order. Marilyn and her children remained, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. No longer did servants scurry to Marilyn's call. Instead, they looked to Denise for guidance. Marion, stripped of his arrogance, avoided Denise's gaze at breakfast, while Philip sat quietly, his laughter gone. Denise took her seat at the head of the table, her presence calm yet commanding. The silence that once crushed her now filled with dignity. She looked at them all and said softly, "This house is no longer a place for deceit. If you remain here, you will respect the truth and the name my father gave me." Marion clenched his fists, but Marilyn silenced him with a sharp glance, her voice weak as she replied, "We will abide, Denise." Later, Denise walked through the gardens with Ernest, who smiled as he watched her. "Your father would be proud," he said warmly. Denise turned to him, her eyes glistening. "I did not do this to humiliate them, Ernest. I did it to protect his name and to prove that love cannot be erased." Ernest nodded, his voice quiet. "That is the difference between you and Marilyn. She sought power for herself, but you sought justice." Denise paused, gazing at the roses her father once admired. "Justice alone is not enough," she whispered. "Mercy is what makes it whole." For the first time, the estate no longer felt like a prison or a battlefield. It felt like home. The morning sun bathed the estate in golden light, casting long shadows that stretched across the gardens. Denise walked slowly along the stone path, her steps steady, her black dress replaced with one of quiet elegance. She paused by the fountain where she once cried alone, her reflection shimmering in the water. The girl who had wept in the rain outside her father's funeral was gone. In her place stood a woman who carried not only the name of her father, but the strength of his legacy. She whispered into the morning air, "Papa, I hope you see me now. I hope you know I never stopped fighting for what you left me." The breeze stirred gently, as though answering her, wrapping around her shoulders like a silent embrace. She walked back toward the mansion, its walls gleaming in the sunlight. Servants bowed respectfully as she passed, and even Marilyn, standing quietly with Marian and Philip, lowered her eyes in acknowledgement. Denise did not gloat, nor did she carry vengeance in her gaze. Instead, her face held serenity, the calm of someone who had survived storms and stood unbroken. She climbed the steps to the grand entrance, pausing at the doors. Turning once more toward the gardens, she let her voice carry into the open air. They tried to bury me, but you planted me in love, Papa, and today I bloom. With that, she entered the house, the rightful mistress of the estate, her father's memory alive in every breath she took. The tears she had shed once in despair had become the very waters of her triumph, and the mansion that once silenced her now stood as the monument of her victory. Here's the Bible verse for the story. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Psalm 30 verse 5, moral of the story: betrayal and rejection may wound the soul, but they are never the final word. Denise's story teaches that dignity in suffering and quiet perseverance turn grief into strength. What is stolen through deceit will one day be restored through truth, and those who endure in silence will rise when the time is right. In the end, it is not power or wealth that lasts, but the justice of God and the resilience of a faithful heart. Closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the reminder that though people may reject us, mock us, or try to erase us, your plans for our lives cannot be destroyed. Just as you lifted Denise from tears of humiliation to triumph in truth, we ask that you also lift us in our own seasons of struggle. When doors are closed against us, open the ones that no hand can shut. When lies are spoken to bury us, let your truth shine brighter than any falsehood. Teach us to endure rejection with dignity, to walk through betrayal with courage, and to show mercy even when we are wronged. May we never lose hope in the night, but hold firmly to your promise that joy will surely come in the morning. Strengthen our hearts to trust you fully, knowing that you are a God of justice, restoration, and unfailing love. In Jesus' mighty name we pray, amen. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much